We had pinned a kind of quiet claim to the place the way people pin a pressed flower between the pages of a book, careful, hopeful, like a promise that would keep. Boxes still ringed the living room in small, uneven fortifications. The mattress sagged where I had sat cross-legged folding Sam's shirts into near-perfect rectangles and imagining a future that smelled faintly of his cologne and the lemon cleaner he prefers. The coffee sat forgotten on the bedside table, cooling into a browned rim I told myself I'd drink later. Sunlight pooled on the mattress in a rectangle like a spotlight, and for a while the apartment was nothing more than those ordinary private shapes, 2 mugs, a stack of novels, the way the windows threw the day into tidy angles. The nightstand had been one of the things we argued about. He found it at a street sale and insisted it would be character. I said it looked like someone else's history and that was the point. It was narrower than it should have been, scuffed along the edges where fists or elbows had met it, and the wood had that smell old varnish keeps, a kind of dried orange peel that sat under dust. I set my cooling mug down and ran a fingertip along the top. My hand paused at a line that was not so much a joint as a ghost of a joint, a hairline seam, dull and stubborn, running along the face where the top met the drawer. It was such an unimportant thing, the seam, the sort of corner of a room you can live with or not notice for years. But something about the angle of it pulled me in. I have always noticed edges. Maybe it's the way my hand healed crooked after I broke it when I was 9 and my father walked out that summer, or maybe it's the way the world rearranges itself once you've learned to look for where things split. I touch the edges of things now the way other people test water with their toes. I pushed at the seam lightly, not thinking anything more than a child with a new curiosity. The wood didn't budge. I tried again, pressing harder, and now my thumb found a small irregularity, the faint impression of a nail head half buried in the grain, a whisper of glue. My nails are not neat, they have the crescent scars of someone who has done things with their hands. I hooked one under the seam and pried, because that's what you do with seams, you test the resistance to see how long they'll hold. There was a soft, almost apologetic sigh when the panel shifted. The sound surprised me, like a secret exhaling. Dust, older than anything I had unpacked, lifted in a cloud that looked at first like a tiny storm and then settled on my wrist. The edge came away in my hand to reveal a shallow cavity, exactly the width of the drawer but not part of it, a tray within a tray, recessed and thin, the kind of hiding place someone might make on purpose. I remember the way I held my breath. There is a part of me that catalogs, not for bomb or for drama, but as if making a list could keep the world from tipping over. The light from the window slanted into that dark rectangle and turned it almost theatrical, as if whatever lay inside had been waiting for light to be shown on it. I could have closed it. I could have left it alone, told myself we were finally settled and that curiosity was a childish distraction and that Sam would come home and we would laugh about boxes and broken seams the way people laugh about anything that doesn't require them to decide. Sam was making music in the kitchen, the clatter of a spoon against a bowl, humming something under his breath, the ordinary small kindnesses that had felt like stitching when we first moved in. He likes things neat enough that they read like care. He would have understood my finding, he would have known how to make it a small, shared secret. For a moment I almost reached for my phone to take a picture of the seam, to text him a gif about mysteries and antiques. Instead, I slid my fingers into the recessed space and drew the inner drawer toward me. The wood was cooler there, as if it had been avoided for years. The finish was smoother, worn by something smaller, something careful. My heart thudded in the even, domestic way it does when you're trying very hard to be sensible, when you whisper to yourself that it's just wood, just an old piece of furniture, just an old house with small, ingenious tricks. The drawer came out with a slight resistance and then stopped, squared and obedient in my lap. Inside, against the dim felt, was nothing I could name from where I sat. It was not empty. Emptiness in these apartments is a kind of thing you notice. It carried a scent, not the lemon soap from earlier but something faintly metallic and floral, like the inside of a jewelry box left in the sun. I lifted my hand, and the light struck the objects and made them small bright interruptions. For a heartbeat my mind offered benign possibilities, an old key someone had tucked away, a note, a coin. I told myself any of those could be innocent, could belong to the nightstand's previous life as much as to ours. I told myself I was inventing plots like a child who reads too many detective novels. I set my jaw, the way I do when I plan to be practical, and reached into the drawer. I could not have known then that whatever I touched next would start to unthread the careful knitting of our life. The drawer smelled like an old bar and a perfume counter, cigarette smoke and something floral, the kind of soft cologne you only notice in photographs. The things inside were not a jumble. They had been arranged, the way someone arranges bones on a table, deliberate, spaced, catalogued. Matchbooks with hotel logos I didn't know, their covers creased just so, a stack of Polaroids, edges thumbed until the emulsion was satin, receipts folded into tidy rectangles from cities I'd never been to, a tiny brass key that fit my hand the way a confession fits a throat, and a leather-bound notebook, warm from fingers, its first page bearing my name in a hand I didn't know, round, looping, intimate enough to make my skin prick. I sat down on the bedroom floor with the drawer balanced in my lap, because I didn't trust the table not to wobble, because the act of moving felt like a small, safe violence. My fingers went from object to object the way someone will test for counterfeit bills, pressure, weight, the subtlest sound of paper sliding on paper. The matchbook smelled faintly of stale smoke and something else that made my head tilt, a floral note I couldn't place. The Polaroids had been cropped, faces cut away, like they'd been edited for a privacy I hadn't consented to. Where faces remained, they were shot from angles that hid names, shoulder, the bend of a neck, hands knitting, a purse left on a chair. The pictures felt clinical, as if the photographer had an index and these were the entries. I pulled a Polaroid from the stack. The woman in the photo was sleeping. The light had flattened her, the pillow aslope around her jaw, a paperback lay open on her chest, pages fanned like wings. For a stupid second, before my brain finished loading, I thought it was a stranger, someone struck by the incandescent grace that sleep gives a face. My hands shook when I flipped a Polaroid and saw a woman sleeping, and then realized the woman was me. It wasn't glamour or angle that told me. It was the small, private geography of my body. A pale crescent at the base of my thumb where I'd nicked myself falling off the swing when I was 9, the tiny scar under my left clavicle where surgery had left a roadmap only I traced, the way my hair had a cowlick that never took instruction. The Polaroid caught the exact tilt I sleep in when I'm exhausted, not when I'm content, chin tucked, a slight pout along the lower lip. I knew it the way you know the sound of your own name being called in a crowded room. The back was blank to the naked eye, no annotation, no crude dates, nothing to point to intent. But the paper itself had fingerprints in a pattern I could map with the pad of my thumb. Someone had handled it a lot. Someone had kept this particular view of me. I looked up, toward the bedroom door, toward the hall where Sam's coat hung like a patient promise. For an absurd instant I rehearsed explanations. Sam takes pictures of people, he loves Polaroids and pockets small tokens. He keeps things. He is careful. The drawer taunted me with plausible narratives so my mind could stall. I let it. I stacked the Polaroid back atop its fellows and began to inventory. The matchbooks were domestic in their anonymity, hotel names that sounded like brand scaffolding, the Wexler, the Portly, the Meridian. The receipts were from places that could be postcards, cities with names I recognized from maps but not from my life. They were time-stamped, which made them more than souvenirs, June, October, March. Each receipt had small notations in the same looping hand as the name in the notebook. Numbers circled, flights checked off, addresses scrawled half-legibly on the margins. The brass key, bronze and warm, had no tag. It felt like an answer and a question both. The leather notebook smelled most of all of another person. I opened it with a slow reverence, the way you open something you suspect might be dangerous. Inside were lists, times, trains, a grid of routes. Names crossed. An address repeated until the ink wore the page thin. A half page, neat as a surgeon's prep, was dedicated to habits, my habits, the ones that could be cataloged like data, wake 7:20 on weekdays, black coffee, bus route 42 to 8th, calls mother Sunday evening. The handwriting was intimate, the shorthand of someone paying attention to the margins of my life. I read a line twice, because it felt like a code. Leaves windows open 2 hours after class. Favorite pastry, almond horn. Scar on left wrist. There was a small diagram, my bedroom, rendered in minimalist strokes, the bed, the nightstand, the window, an arrow pointing to where the camera would be placed. Not plans, I corrected myself, inventories. The diagonal of the room looked like a map of intent. I tried to measure my reaction, how my pulse moved against the delicate architecture of my thoughts. My first movement had been denial, surely this could be explained. Then there was a pragmatic phase, document, photograph, fold. Then a quiet, stunned grief, that peculiar mix of betrayal and humiliation that arrives when the most private instances of your life have been observed like specimens. Everything in the drawer was small, but scaled to a precise obsession. The objects weren't trophies, exactly. They were a system, evidence, catalogued and preserved. Whoever assembled this had patience. Whoever compiled these had time and a reason to watch. A line in the leather notebook caught at my eye, a single entry in a different pen, brisk, almost bureaucratic. My name, spelled carefully on the first page the way you address a letter you never intend to send. The hand slanted oddly on the final stroke. It felt like a beginning. I sat on the floor until the Polaroids grew hazy at their centers, as if all the white space around the sleeping woman's face were widening. I wanted to burn the drawer, or call someone, or laugh so hard I could undo the story. Instead I set the Polaroid on top of the notebook like a coin on a ledger and looked at the small brass key until my eyes watered. The room hummed with the normal Sunday sounds, Sam in the shower, a distant lawnmower, and they felt suddenly staged. There was a logic to what I was holding, a patience I hadn't been prepared to meet. It was not accident. It was not affection. It was collection. The thought landed with the slow, inexorable weight of something inevitable. This was not an attachment to me, it was an accumulation of me. I gathered the Polaroids back into a neat stack and, for the first time in months, I began to make a list. I turned the Polaroid over with a thumb that won't stop trembling, and at first everything is ordinary in the way things can be ordinary when they have already been weaponized. The paper has that faint oil smell of instant film, the edges soft with handling, the image is a wash of night and a body in sleep, my cheek against the pillow, the line of my jaw softer than I remember, hair fanned like spilled ink. On the back, in Sam's looping ink, is a date. The pen has bled a little where it met the paper, the same heavy underline under my name he scratched into his leather notebook the other night. I remember the slow, intimate curl of the A, the cross of the T that hooks down like a question. I stare at the numbers until they stop being numbers and start meaning something. Months before we signed the lease, months before we stacked our boxes in the hall and decided his careful kindness was reliability. March. A day in March. A year that should not belong to this life. For a second I tell myself the joke I have been telling all week, Polaroids are bad at faces, two people could look the same in a bad blur. Someone else's mouth, someone else's night. My voice in my head is practical, clinical. Misattribution is the simplest fix. Mistakes are fixable. Sam makes lists and rewrites them until they read tidy. Maybe he misfiled. Maybe he'd been looking at an old picture of a stranger. Maybe this ink is a leftover from a different notebook. Then something slides out from the stack, thin paper folded twice, the kind that has been folded and unfolded until the creases remember your hands. It lands on my lap like an accusation. A bus ticket. The yellowish strip is stamped with a route number and a departure time. My chest compresses at the sight of the numbers because they are not a time someone else uses. They are the exact minute we used to go to the grocery when I was a child, 10:42 a.m., not rounded, never rounded, a ritual my mother insisted on because the store was quieter then, because it is easier to hide behind canned corn and a polished produce bin when the world is falling apart. I know that number the way I know the pattern of the phone dial that always had my father's last call scratched into it. I know the sound of the sliding glass door at the market, the fluorescent sting, the smell of cheap coffee at the counter where the clerk always nodded to my mother as if the nod might hold things together. I know that summer, the heat that seemed to bruise the paint on our porch, the suitcases on the stoop, the way my father closed the door with his arm full of shirts and then went back once, twice, as if he hoped the house would rearrange itself around him. He didn't come back. I remember Mrs. Alvarez from next door watering her tomato plants until they bent toward the pavement as if in supplication. I remember being small, pressing my palm to the glass of a bus shelter and watching the world move in without me. On the ticket, beneath the printed route and time, someone has written, in that same looping hand, watching. My first thought is practical: match the handwriting, check the pressure of the pen, compare the slant to the R in my name in Sam's notebook. The second is animal and immediate: get up, go downstairs, rip the house apart. I fold the paper along its old crease and the movement makes my mouth go dry. The ink is the same, an italicized, patient cursive where the T's are crossed high, a flourish on the Y that curves like a hook. The handwriting is a map. I flip the Polaroid again for anything else: a tiny smudge of lipstick, a curl of hair out of place, the corner of a patterned blanket, but the image is composed to be anonymous, shot from an angle that hides identity but keeps intimacy intact. The date on the back frames the night, March 14th, a night when I know I was at my mother's, or at least I think I was. I start to run dates in my head the way I used to run fingers through film negatives in the darkroom I never actually worked in. Months before the move. Trips to my mother, to the market, to the park by the river where school buses used to idle. Every small trip I have made in the last 2 years begins to line up like stations on a map someone else used to mark my comings and goings. The address inked under the date is a place I have never given anyone, not Sam, not my mother, not the landlords we've had. It reads like a secret and a wound: 421 Kingsley Avenue, apartment 2B. The number is wrong in a way that makes my stomach flip. The street is the one from the summer my father left. The memory and the ink double and become heavier than the paper. I press the pad of my thumb to the writing, to the faint sheen where the pen hit the card, as if warmth could tell me whether it was fresh or a relic. The bus ticket crackles in my hand. The word watching hangs there between my thumb and the paper, and it feels less like a note and more like a promise. I tell myself, aloud this time, that we can test every possible explanation. I tell myself that Sam could be a man who kept mementos and misfiled them. I tell myself that my heart is loud and betrays me, that pattern seeking saved me once and is now making dangers where there are none. I know all my own habits, how I minimize, how I count things to feel safe, so I list quietly, check the dates, compare handwriting, cross-reference trips I took that March. Be methodical. Be precise. But then my mind slides to the summer again, the slammed door, my small hand in the cool of the hallway while my mother set the kettle on. If someone had been in those corners then, watching us move like an ache, what would they have learned? Where would they have stayed? How long do you sit at a bus stop before a life becomes something you know how to reconstruct? Sam is in the kitchen humming to himself, the kind of small domestic sound that used to be the soundtrack of safety. The Polaroid and the ticket feel foreign in my lap. They feel like evidence and confession both. I fold them back together exactly the way they were and slide them into the hidden drawer again, not because I believe myself but because I need time to think without the pressure of him looking over my shoulder. When I close the drawer, the word watching vibrates against the wood, and for the first time in months I count the spaces between us like the gaps in a map. I know the next thing I have to do is follow the date, follow the address, follow the brittle line of ink that turned my private nights into a paper trail. I stand and the room tilts. Outside, the hallway is quiet. Sam calls my name from the kitchen, simple, soft. I let the drawer sit closed a beat longer and then, because something in me has finally stopped pretending, I pick up the Polaroid and write the date into my phone. Everything in the drawer felt deliberate. Not messy, not occult, curated. The papers were stacked like specimen slides, each one labeled in Sam's looping hand, dates with initials, sticky notes with clipped fragments of addresses, a thin map folded down to the size of a matchbook. I spread them on the bed like evidence, the hotel matchbook from the other drawer propped beside a receipt that smelled faintly of smoke and lemon soap. The pages threaded together like the margins of a life someone had been following. At first it was the small things that read like a catalog. A ledger page with a column of dates, 5/12, 6/3, 7/29, and beside each one 2 initials, like nicknames, LO, MB, L. A sticky note peeled from the corner of a page and carried half an address, Crescent, 2, and then nothing, as if the rest had been torn away on purpose. Another sheet was riddled with arrows and dots, on it my workplace was circled twice in heavy red, the office building's block underlined and a faint dotted line looping away from it toward a street I hadn't registered at first. I started cataloging the catalog. It felt safer than panic. It was what I did: list, cross-check, make order. I pulled the little map flat. There were 2 circles around my office and, drawn in pencil, a path that traced the short walk I took every morning from the subway, the turn where I buy coffee, the bench where an older woman feeds pigeons. Someone had drawn my commute in miniature. Someone had traced my routine in pencil and ink. When I matched the hotel's receipt to my old paper calendar, the shape of it clicked cold and precise. The receipt was dated a Thursday in late May. I flipped open the calendar I've kept for years, messy scrawls of dental appointments and my mother's birthdays, the small annotated tickets I saved so I can remember where I went, and there it was, that same Thursday, with a note in my handwriting: "Mom, bring photos." I remember the way my mother had opened the apartment door in her slippers and how we drank coffee from chipped mugs and pretended the summer heat wasn't going to the soft places of her patients. I remembered the bus ticket in my coat pocket because I'd kept it from that day as something small and defensible, proof I'd been with her, not with him. The receipt and my calendar sat next to each other and didn't match by mistake. The time stamped on the receipt lined up with hours I had been out of town, visiting my mother. The initials beside that May date were SW. And elsewhere on the same page a note, in Sam's same looping hand, "Watching." I feel my breath pull in short, measured draws like someone practicing a rescue. The sentence that forms in my skull is quiet and relentless: "He had tracked me while I was with my mother." I moved through the stack like a coroner. There were taxi stubs and coffee shop receipts from mornings I thought I'd been alone, a folded bus pass from the summer when my father left that place in my head where things are supposed to be steady. There were hotel receipts labeled with chain names and card numbers. There were photos of storefronts, not of tourist attractions, but of the narrow turn of my childhood street, the deli with the yellow awning I hadn't thought about in years. Each scrap was a footprint. Each footprint was a route someone had taken along the borders of me. Some of the dates matched trips I had told Sam about out loud. Others matched small absences I'd never mentioned: a spontaneous visit to a friend in another borough, an afternoon I took off because I couldn't get my mind to work. There were numbers that were clearly times: 0, 8, 15, 14, 40. There were short notations: left APT at 7:50, and the more I read, the less they felt incidental and the more they felt like stitching, a record of the moment someone had believed they could predict me. I found lists with names I didn't recognize, and my throat went hollow at the way he had indexed people as if they were specimens. Some names were crossed out, some circled. Some had addresses, some had one-word annotations: quiet, left, gone. The writing that wasn't Sam's, cramped and precise and almost surgical, looked like output from the building's ledger, landlord notes, names clipped from public records. The margins of those pages had been annotated in my own handwriting in the past: dates when I paid rent, when I filed a noise complaint, and seeing them next to his annotations made the room tilt. I found, folded into the back of a notebook, a page-long column like a spreadsheet. The top of the column read dates and then location/initials. Beside dates that corresponded with my mother's visits were a cluster of entries that all referenced the same street in small looping print: Crescent, 3B, and Crescent, 3B, leave note. A thing that tastes like metal, moved across my palms. Leave note, the verb divorced from tenderness and applied like a procedure. I imagine the quietness of him making lists, methodically, like a hobbyist assembling a collection that when finished looks less like admiration and more like an infrastructure of control. My stomach nodded in a way I have learned to name. It is a reluctance to be abandoned again, a small child's strategy of predicting where the other shoe will fall. It is also the precise, focused edge I get when I need to map something that seems designed to erase me. On a page near the top someone had drawn a little grid and written, in that handwriting of his that decided names: M, July 14, 20. My pulse hit the roof of my mouth. I remembered the flyer I had once seen in the laundry room, a poster with a grainy photograph and the name Mara printed in block letters, a missing tenant, 3 years ago. I hadn't put them together, not until the ledger became a map and the map began to look like a ledger that kept crossing paths with my life. I fold the receipt and the calendar together like 2 pages of a single book and feel something in me steady into a shape. Denial doesn't have room here. There's only this crystalline fact, cold and precise. Someone kept a log of the days I left the city, the hours I was with my mother, the nights I didn't sleep at home. Someone tracked my movements and then wrote them down. I trace the pencil line on the map leading from my office and follow it to the edge of the paper and, there, in a margin shaded in yellow, I see a single word in Sam's hand, next. Beside it, a date I hadn't reached yet. I stuffed the drawer back into the seam and shoved the lid of the cardboard box down over it because denial felt safer than the alternative. The drawer slid in with that soft, resistant scrape, wood against wood and a whisper of sawdust, then met the cradle of the nightstand and sat square. I tamped the lid closed with the heel of my hand until the corrugated edge made that faint pop, the sound a poor substitute for locking something away. The Polaroids lay folded flat beneath the lid like a secret blanket. I could feel the tiny stiffness of the emulsion through the cardboard. I told myself there was still time to think. I told myself I could put everything back where it belonged and pretend I'd never seen the sleeping woman who was my face. For 2 days I tried to be normal. I answered Sam's jokes with the laugh he'd always liked, the short, bright thing that let him keep talking, and measured my humor into the small space between us so it wouldn't wobble. He made a face when I overdid it, the way he does when a recipe goes wrong, and I could tell he understood the cadence of my apologies before I even had to say them. He liked sloppy chicken with too much paprika and an obscene amount of melted cheese. I made it the way his mother apparently used to, brown the meat until it left a rust ring on the skillet, deglaze with a little red wine because he loved the way it sang, then simmer until the tomatoes turned to something thick and forgiving. He ate and hummed and ruffled my hair in that casual, practiced way that reads like affection and sometimes reads like possession. After dinner he did the dishes with those long, efficient strokes, a hand in the suds while he read my face to see if I was watching. I paid attention to everything because attention had always been my tool. When I was a child my father left through the back door in the middle of summer and forgot his keys. We found them weeks later under the hydrangea, and the smallest details have felt like maps ever since. The fracture of that leaving taught me to map exits. So I measured, catalogued, the angle at which Sam refilled my water glass, the way he folded napkins into rectangles the exact width of his fingers, the almost imperceptible way his foot would turn the exact degree to face the door when he stood in the foyer. They could be acts of tenderness, I told myself, because I wanted tenderness. I could make a list and check it and say, see? Nothing to worry about. Lists have edges. Edges keep you from falling into the kind of vertigo that leads to panic. I straightened the throw on the couch 3 times. I replastered the wall where we both swear the paint had been scuffed and, each time, left my hand lingering a beat longer than was necessary on the seam where the nightstand met the wall, as if an extra second could cement the story I was choosing to keep. The world is where I left it. The first night I slept fitfully, imagining the Polaroids in hands other than mine. On the second night I convinced myself I was tired enough to sleep through anything. Sam kissed me goodnight the way he always does, forehead to mouth, a small, private bang of proximity, and for a moment I let the old warmth sluice back over me. He smelled like the shampoo he keeps in the shower that smells faintly of lemon and something crisp, like hotel soap. He tucked the blanket up under my chin with an index finger precision that used to make my mother sigh and say, "He's organized," as if organization were a feature, not a strategy. When he leaned away I saw it. Not at first, my brain been cataloging bigger things, but then my eye caught the windowsill where I'd leaned earlier when I pried the seam open. There was a faint puckered circle of shadow in the paint, the exact size of the button on the remote, and in its center the tiny, obscene bead of glass I had convinced myself wasn't there. A camera lens, no larger than a sesame seed, recessed in a bezel the color of old pennies. A perfect, dark pupil staring back into the room. It was so small I thought it might be a splinter of dirt until light from the street lamp hit it and the glass flashed like someone had thrown a match. There was a smear of adhesive around it, yellowed, almost crystalline, like the residue left behind by cheap tape. I could tell by the way it sat that it had been mounted to look inward, angled down just enough to catch whoever lay on the bed. I had leaned over that windowsill when I examined the nightstand. My cheek had been inches from where the lens sat. My stomach dropped as though something had punched a neat hole through my diaphragm. The metallic tang of adrenaline filled my mouth. Little, precise muscles tightened along my jaw. For all my cataloging, all my counting, I had never counted on the room itself watching me. I let him kiss me again because the gesture required nothing and gave me shelter, and because there are more ways to be brave than to confront. His lips were warm, his hand was steady at the small of my back. I listened to him breathe and felt the whole room rearrange itself around that tiny bead of glass. The drawer beneath the cardboard box hummed with secrets. The illusion of ordinary domesticity folded and wrinkled in my hands like the napkin I'd folded earlier. I lay very still until Sam turned the light off and the apartment sighed into a quieter dark. Then I did what I always do when the world no longer fits where I left it. I counted the exits, traced the seams, and felt the tight, familiar pull toward the small, methodical act that grounds me. I told myself I was going to check the lens. I told myself I was going to be careful. I waited until he was breathing even enough to be called sleeping, then slid out from under the blanket and moved toward the window. I start small because that's what feels safe, incremental, tidy, like sweeping a room so you can see the floor again. I pull the leather notebook onto my lap and go through it page by page under the dim lamp by the bed. Sam snores a steady, domestic bass at my shoulder. He sleeps like he's earned absolute possession of the night. His jaw clenches sometimes even in sleep, and it clenched the last time I asked, casually, who he'd dated before me. He smiled and brushed it off. Exes, he said, as if they were chapters he had filed away. But I remember the clench because it's the first time in 3 months I felt my question land somewhere it shouldn't have. I photocopy names, transcribe scrawls into my phone like I'm copying a recipe I don't want to forget. There are repeated words, Mara, sometimes just M, written in Sam's looping hand and underlined, circled, annotated with little arrows. Addresses dot the margins, shorthand for hotels, bus stations, a laundromat on the corner of my childhood street. I copy them into a notes app, then switch to the city's online archives because movement feels like work and work is how I keep my chest from tripping over itself. The archives are beige and bureaucratic and mercifully impersonal. Building permits, tenant registries, code violations, things that existed before people did, the kind of records that like being exact. I lose track of time. At 2 a.m. my screen is a grid of typed names and dates. I have an open tab for the landlord's name, another for the property's maintenance requests, another for old police blotters. I cross-reference and, like a compass, the notebook's marginalia points the way. 3 years ago, a missing tenant report from our building. I find it by accident at first, somewhere between a 2017 occupancy list and a 2018 complaint about noisy pipes, but the file number is stamped and official and the name sends a small, cold current through my fingers. Mara. The scrawl in Sam's notebook wasn't a meaningless obsession, it maps, almost neatly, onto the city's paper trail. I print the file to my phone as a PDF, then pinch it bigger and smaller until the image fills the screen. The report is dated, tidy, written in a sociology of neutrals, date last seen, unit number, 2B, landlord contacted, next of kin unknown, no immediate evidence of foul play. There's a sheet of photographs stapled to the back. One of them is a Polaroid, grainy, the lamp casting the same hard crescent of shadow I remember on the Polaroid from the drawer. I know that photograph the way you know the scar on your knee, the angle, the way her eyelashes throw a shadow, the smudge in the lower right corner where someone absent-mindedly dragged a thumb across film. But it isn't some stranger in the photo. It's me. Not exactly, sleeping, hair spread like spilled ink, the bruise on the temple I think I noticed once in a shop window, and the same crooked pattern of light on the couch someone used as an unintentional signature. My hands go numb. The phone slips a hair in my grip and I clench, as much to keep it from hitting the bedspread as to keep myself from dropping it. I read and reread the caption beneath the photo, found among personal effects in basement storage unit. The words are bureaucratic, antiseptic, they should soothe. They don't. They make something colder click into place. There are logs attached, maintenance keys signed in by the landlord on dates that match the scribbles in Sam's notebook. There are receipts for hotel rooms with adjacent dates. There's a folded bus ticket taped to the inside cover of the report, route number, fare paid, the kind of paper you keep when you don't want to forget where you let someone go. The ticket's destination is the same stretch of parched blocks where my father left in the summer I turned 9. I remember those blocks the way I remember how it felt to have an arm in plaster and then not, that dull, constant ache that means something has broken and been dried out but never healed the same. I copy the case number into my notes, then the names of officers listed as contacts, the landlord's minimal, brisk signature. I take screenshots, because paper lives forever in my phone. I make a list, file number, photograph ID, date last seen, Unit 2B, and my handwriting goes small and careful. There is a notation in a different hand on the bottom of the report, additional photographs recovered, 7 total. Someone else has seen this pattern before. Someone else cataloged it, counted it, logged it into a system designed to take the human out of chaos and make it into an evidence chain. My finger lingers over that line until the room settles into a different gravity. Sleep no longer feels like an option for me tonight. The bed is an evidence table and I am a reluctant technician trying to piece together what the patient didn't get to say. I sit very still and I listen to Sam breathe, the rise and fall a metronome that seems to mock the quick bolt of panic under my ribs. When I first found the drawer I told myself I was being paranoid, that people keep things, that obsession masquerades as affection. Now the pages and the archive and the bus ticket make a tidy corridor straight to the moment someone decided to stop being a woman on a couch and start being a file. I scroll further and my eyes snag on a slip of handwriting pasted into the file like an afterthought. The letters are looser than anything in the typed report, the ink a little smeared. It's one of Sam's arrows, one of his little loops. Mara. Watching. The same single word I've been unable to translate out of his notebooks is here in the municipal records, translated into the language of investigation. My stomach caves in. I should close the laptop, go wake him up, throw the folder on his chest and watch the face he makes when his compartmentalized life collides with mine. I should do 100 things. But the room smells like him and like coffee from the daytime, and outside the street is the usual late-night wind, indifferent, and I am cataloging evidence like someone waiting for a verdict. I scroll back to the photograph again because the world is kinder when you can stare at a single point and refuse to move. The Polaroid in the file is the same as the one in my hand weeks ago, only now it's been given a name and a number and a place in an archive. My knees go soft, and I realize I'm holding my breath. The report has one last line, stamped in blue ink across the bottom, person of interest interviewed, see attached interview notes. I open the attached notes. I lay the Polaroids and receipts out on the kitchen table like evidence, edges tidy, dates facing up. The flashbacks feel clinical when I look at them that way. January 14th, the coffee shop on 3rd with the sticky counter. March 2nd, the bus ticket folded until the creases are soft, a matchbook from a hotel with the brass key tucked beneath it. My hands don't shake until I hear the door click and Sam's shoes on the mat. He steps in with that easy, late afternoon smile he uses on strangers and delivery people. It takes him 2 beats, maybe 3, to find whatever he wants at the side of the table. I watch the way his face slides from casual to measured, the same slow calibration I've seen 100 times when he's deciding how much to give and what to hold back. He reaches for a mug, his fingers closing around the handle, and freezes as if there's a photograph of his own paws. There's a line of light across his jaw where the window catches him, it makes him look younger and smaller at the same time. I tell myself I'll be calm. I have practiced this. I have rehearsed the questions into neat, neutral tones so my voice won't reveal the calculation running behind my eyes. Why is my face in your drawer, Sam? I ask, the question bare and steady. He laughs, too quick, a defensive puff of air that lands somewhere between a joke and a cough. One breath, and then a lie. What? Which drawer? He says, like he's surprised, like the concept of a hidden drawer full of my pictures could only come from somewhere external, someone else's absurdity. I push the Polaroids an inch to him. He bends his head, his expression folding into something thinner. The photograph of me sleeping is first, the light across my cheek, the loosened hair, the small line of my mouth. I remember the night I took that nap the afternoon we met his mother. I remember waking with a stupid, domestic bliss and thinking, I am safe. I watch his eyes, looking for the moment they will tell me I've misread everything. He clears his throat. I kept things, he says, and there it is, the confession soft as a hinge. I didn't mean to make you feel. His hands are in his pockets and I can see his knuckles whiten. There's a migration of lies and truths, like a cracked clock. The hands move and tell the right hours, but the tick is missing and the minute is gone. I followed you, at first, he says, and the room tilts. It's not the big cinematic entrance I imagined. He doesn't shout, doesn't drop to his knees. He supplies facts with the same careful cadence he uses when cataloging receipts. Not all the time. I mean, sometimes. When you went to your mother's, I took the bus a couple of times. I thought you'd gone back to that neighborhood, that you were slipping away. I kept notes so I could understand. Why? My voice is small. It is the voice of a child asking a parent's impossible question. He exhales like someone answering a questionnaire they never wanted to fill. Because I was afraid you'd leave. Because your father left. He stops, searches my face as if reaching for some permission to continue, finds none and keeps going anyway. You spoke about it a lot. About the summer you disappeared from yourself. I thought if I tracked things, your patterns, the people you met, where you stayed, I could protect us. Keep track. Make sure nothing happened. Protect. The word tastes like something I'd been denying. He says it like a kindness. But then his smile slips, and there's a notch in it where the rest of the sentence should be. I didn't think it would matter. I wasn't sinister. I thought of it like collecting. Like a scrapbook. He laughs, and it's small and brittle. I have notebooks, receipts, little maps. Photos help me remember the details. I thought I'd piece it together, for us. How did you, I start. There are questions lined up in my mouth. How did you take that picture of me sleeping? Did you come into the apartment while I was out? Did you use the spare key? Who else? But the edges of the questions are dangerous, and asking them aloud would force him to fill in the blanks I am trying not to see. So I don't. The nursery of my avoidance is an old reflex. My father's absence taught me which silences can keep you safe and which will break you. I realize with a small, floaty horror that lesson is what kept me from demanding everything. He sees the hesitation and leans forward, reaching for the Polaroid like he's retrieving something tender. He fingers the photo as if reading Braille. I put it in the drawer because I couldn't sleep some nights, he says. When you were in New York for work, when we were apart, I would look at it and know, you're here. You're real. I know how that sounds, I know it sounds wrong. His voice is taut with apology and justification braided together. It started with me watching the building. There were strange comings and goings. The landlord did things that didn't add up. I was curious. Then Mara, he names her like dropping a pebble into still water. The name ripples. I flinch at the name because it is a hinge in the building's past, because I'd seen it in a file and then again in his handwriting, in the margins of his notebook, underlined 3 times. He watches my reaction and says, she disappeared. I thought if I kept documents, if I could map anyone who left, I'd see a pattern. I didn't know it would. I didn't mean to end up with your pictures. I was never in her apartment, he says hurriedly, reading what's not being asked, anticipating my worst question. I didn't hurt anyone. I was trying to help. I told myself that. I told myself I was being careful. Some of it is true. Some of it fits like fragments of a broken plan. He gives me the dates that match the receipts on the table, mentions the bus route that leads to my childhood neighborhood, adds that he bought an extra pass that weekend because the timeline didn't add up. He speaks in specifics and flinches when my eyes count them on the table. Each small corroboration reconstructs a version of reality I don't recognize. The rest, the parts about taken photos, about the drawer, are varnished in explanations that half cover the nails. I want to ask about the bus ticket with the summer stamp, about the matchbook, about the brass key that looked like it fit more than a closet. I want to ask whether any other names appear in the margins of his notebooks, whether the pattern of his watching aligns with Mara's last days. I want to ask why my sleeping face was taken with such intimacy, why a man I love thought that could be a comfort. Instead I fold my hands on the table and feel a small, precise fury at the neatness of it all. The folders, the dates, the loops of his handwriting, Leah, in his leather notebook, written as if labeling an object. The air in the kitchen is thin, the light through the blinds falls in measured bars across the receipts like prison stripes. He warns me softly, as if reading a thermostat. Please don't be angry. I never wanted to make you feel. You made me feel watched, I say, and the words surprise me by how level they are. They do not cover what I don't ask. They don't stretch into the dangerous corners where other names lurk. He closes his eyes a second and opens them with a look that is almost pleading. I wanted to keep us from being broken, he says. I wanted proof that you weren't, like he was, I wanted proof you were still there. The sentence is a confession and a claim. It explains some things and fractures others. I feel the countertop steady beneath my palms and simultaneously the whole room tilt, like being inside a ship where the horizon just shifted. The photograph of me sleeping catches the light, my eyes, in the picture, are closed. Outside, the city moves on. Inside, a small drawer of curated things has begun to rewrite the map of our lives. He says one more thing, softer, as if offering me a bridge I don't want. I kept everything because I love you, he tells me. For a moment I can't tell if he's telling the truth. Then I notice, in his coat pocket, a folded piece of paper with a date I haven't seen on the table yet, older, and older still than all of them. His hand hovers at his side over it, protective. I realize there are questions I cannot ask, not yet. My throat tightens. I will need to know everything, but some knowledge will make the house too small for me. I am cataloging now, this line of lies, that half-breath of truth, the names underlined in his notebooks. I am making a list in my head of what to do next without letting him see the list. He waits for me to break, to forgive, to denounce. The kettle clicks in the next room, the timer on the oven hums a civilian note. His smile is small and pleading, his hands, when he finally drops them, still look like someone who catalogs their own life in margins. You never, I start, then stop. I can see the bus ticket in my mind, folded against my palm. I can see Mara's name as a dark pool in his papers. I can see, too, that whatever the truth is, it will not be simple. He leans in as if to close a wound. Please, he says. Talk to me. I pick up the Polaroid of myself sleeping and hold it between two fingers. The back is warm from where he must have held it last. The date is scrawled at the bottom in his slanted hand. Underneath the date, in tiny ink, is a single word that stops me, watching. When Sam finally said the words, he said them like an apology that needed no answer. I took pictures, he told me, as if that settled everything. Just to remember. I never meant to hurt anyone. Those 5 words were a hinge. He folded them around the rest, careful, smaller admissions that kept something large and ugly out of sight. He wouldn't say Mara's name when I asked, his mouth closed like it was pinning a bird. But what he would say instead rattled in the corner of the room, the landlord who passed through apartments the way seasons pass through a town, leaving little notes and ledger entries, a roster of tenants that thinned without explanation, the way a building could be a skin and everyone inside it wearing thin at different places. I didn't know yet whether he was protecting someone or protecting himself. All I knew was that the paper trail, once tugged, uncoiled. Detective Ruiz met me in a room that smelled faintly of tea and old paper. His office felt more like a careful mind, thin stacks of envelopes, binders labeled in his exact block script, a corkboard of pinned photocopies with a patient, almost tender geometry. He believes in the slow arithmetic of objects, how a matchbook, a receipt, a bead of dried coffee on a napkin can be added and multiplied until they mean something awful and specific. He said so without flourish. He explained chain of custody, how time cements tiny things into proof, how holes in people's stories start small and get eaten away by the inertia of facts. He set an evidence bag on the table as if it were a thing to be respected, then began to lay out the pieces I'd already found, a leather notebook in Sam's looping hand, hotel matchbooks from hotels we'd never visited, Polaroids with dates that didn't match our timeline. He let me catalog them aloud, dates, places, stray notations, until the room itself started to echo with the rhythm of his questions. Then he slid across a worn, stamped envelope. It was the color of Tide-stained paper, the edges softened from handling. The postmark had a city name I recognized from the bus ticket I'd found, the one from that summer when my father had walked away and left a bag on the handle of his bike. My full name was printed on the front in block capitals, the type strained with age. 5 years old, the stamp said, the ink blurred. The sight of my own name, not Sam's handwriting, not some informal scrawl, but my full legal name stamped years before I met him, pulled air out of me like a hand. It felt almost obscene, an artifact of me existing in a past that I hadn't been watching, an address for attention I had no memory of soliciting. My lungs tried to catch up and failed. For a second I was in my childhood kitchen again, listening to the scrape of a chair dragged away from the table, waiting for the sound of his footsteps and not hearing them. The pattern of abandonment folded into a new, colder geometry. Ruiz didn't let me float there. He watched my face the way someone watches a fragile animal. We keep everything, he said quietly. Sometimes it's what seems trivial that ties things together. Someone sends a letter, someone keeps a receipt, someone writes a name down. Over time, those dots make a line. For him, the envelope was a dot that didn't belong where it was supposed to. He lifted a single corner and let me open it. Inside was a photocopy of a page torn from a ledger, typewritten names and dates, columns for rent paid and complaints logged. In the margin, in a hand I knew all too well, someone had circled 2 entries and written a short note. The first entry was the building's missing tenant, Mara Flores. Date, June, 3 years ago. Next to it, in a different line, was my name, printed where no one should have had cause to print it then. The note in the margin read, in cramped, certain letters, seen leaving with S. Read. The pen had been steady the day it was written. The type on the page hadn't aged, whatever had been copied into that envelope 5 years ago had been saved, filed, mailed, or hidden by somebody who thought to mark connections no one else had noticed. That somebody had an eye for patterns. That somebody had been paying attention in a way that made small things monstrous. Sam had always given me kindnesses that felt like safety nets, the mug warmed before I got out of bed, the list of errands cross-checked and reorganized. Now the same gestures felt like map-making. Ruiz pushed the photocopy toward me and folded his hands. We traced the ledger back, he said. Landlord kept meticulous records. He moved through units like a collector. People came and left. A few just stopped. Someone mailed this in before any of that got official. Your name had been typed on that page 5 years before you and Mr. Reed met. My mouth made a shape that was not a question. Sam's partial confession, photos to remember, never to hurt, sounded like a child's explanation for a wicked thing. Ruiz's photocopy smelled like old paper and the cold of being observed. The room contracted into a single, precise point where the ledger, Sam's notebook, and my childhood all intersected. I thought of the bus ticket, the dates on the Polaroids that came before I even knew we would move, the matchbooks that matched the hotels in the ledger. I thought of the landlord's name repeated in different entries, the way he had been described to me as ephemeral in phone calls and pass-through smiles. I thought of Mara, and the way Sam had not said her name. My life, in a way I couldn't yet articulate, was ungluing. I felt the edges start to flake, the quiet background of my days, my assumptions about safety and consent. The shapes I'd used to hold everything together were softening like old glue. Ruiz waited for me to do something, to fold the paper back into itself, to throw it away, to laugh. The detective's office was quiet except for the clock at the back wall, slow and inevitable. I smoothed the photocopy and read the next line aloud without meaning to, last seen exiting with man matching tenant records for Samuel Reed. Samuel. Sam. The name landed like a stone dropped through glass. I hadn't expected the ledger to have my name. I hadn't expected it to have his. My hand closed around the paper. The sentence below it was shorter than I thought it would be, and when I read it my vision tilted and the room spun in that precise, awful way that one's world does when a hinge finally gives. She was photographed asleep, it said. I sit on the floor of our bedroom with the closet door open and the light on, and because I've always been the kind of person who catalogs things when the room won't stop spinning, I make a list in my head as I move through his things, shirts folded the same way on the same shelf, a shelf of travel books with little sticky tabs, a row of boxes with perfectly aligned lids. The world narrows to edges and seams. I tell myself I'm only looking for an explanation, a how, not a why. Explanations are manageable. Whys are like fractures, unpredictable and jagged. I rewind us in my mind because pattern is my refuge. First date, he knew the band I loved before I'd mentioned them. He laughed and said, "You'd love this song," and he was right. The memory smells like bar air and the cheap citrus of his cologne. Once, when I called in a panic because I'd locked myself out, he appeared on my stoop with coffee and a calm that felt like a promise. Other times, leaving a note on the fridge that matched my handwriting, showing up on my mother's porch with a casserole when I didn't tell him I was going over. Each action had, at the time, the same tiny muscle of intention, tenderness or competence. It is impossible now to separate the two without slicing the skin. On his side of the closet, beneath a stack of shirts, there is a shallow leather case. The zipper makes a small, resigned sound when I open it. Inside, passports. Life condensed into passports. The first is Sam, of course, and then Sam again with a different middle name, Sam again with a different birth city. One has the rubbery wear of a man who registers more exits than entrances. Another has a stamp from a hotel in a city whose streets I've never threaded. The name pages are crisp but the photo is the same, the smile that used to be our private weather. Next to the passports are hotel loyalty cards clipped into a metal ring like an iron bouquet. Each card carries a hotel logo and, beneath, an address I don't recognize, a squat place in Queens, a boutique strip near the river, an old building that I later cross-reference in my head to the missing persons file I'd skimmed at 3 a.m. The loyalty program numbers are smudged with the skin oils of frequent tapping. One card has a hole punched near the corner as if it had been kept on a keyring, always ready. I find a folded slip of paper, small, the sort you tear from a pad. His looping hand, the loops I've traced with my thumb when he worries, is neat and practiced. The header reads routines. Underneath, days, times, locations. There are 2 columns. The left lists his obligations, gym, work, flights. The right is more exacting. At first I think they are his guesses about me, or notes from our conversations. Leah, Monday, August 6th office, Tuesdays, mother, Wednesday, yoga 7 p.m., Friday, drinks with Claire 9 p.m., Sunday, calls 3 p.m. Then, between the lines, the handwriting tightens and the verbs get smaller, more clinical. Check mail weds. Leave note 3 p.m. Confirm mother visit 10:15. Next to mother, there is a time, 10:15, and the abbreviation M. He has penciled small coordinates, not GPS, but an address I recognize from the neighborhood of my childhood summers, the one my father left from. My throat collects the taste of rust. He has written the bus schedule I used as a teenager the summer after that, down to the stop I waited at when I first learned people could leave for good. My hands shake. The list continues with his own details, the kind of things a person jots for themselves, flights that overlap with my vacations, hotels booked with 2 beds, phone numbers for rooms that bear my initials penciled in the margin. There are annotations, shorthand, SM, New York 6 of 12, Leah M. One entry is circled twice in blue ink, weds August 15th, visits mother, photograph, 8:15. The loop of the ink becomes a small, deliberate echo on the page. I go through the leather case more carefully and find Loyalty Club emails printed out and folded, dates highlighted. Receipt stubs from nights I thought he'd been away, with charges at hotels 2 blocks from the place I met him on our first date. A small, plastic key card is tucked in the back of his wallet, the photo on its corner smudged by constant presence. There is a tiny notebook with tabs. I've seen him carry it, used it for grocery lists and sketches, but this one is different. It is full of notes in that same looping hand, phone numbers, brief descriptions, one-line histories of women followed by the name of a hotel and a time. The entry for me is longer and reads like an itinerary. It lists, favorite band, allergy to strawberries, the name of my high school prom date, my mother's maiden name. Items I told him in trust. Items I had thought were evidence of intimacy. For 15 minutes I sit with the notebook balanced on my knees, and the line between, I care about you, and, I arrange you, begins to blur until it is not a line at all but a smear. He had appeared on my doorstep because he knew where I kept my spare key. He had made coffee because he had tracked my phone and knew I would call. The small, precise kindnesses are no longer gestures of warmth, they are the parts of a construction I didn't know I was being built into. I think of my father walking out and how I learned to watch for patterns that meant leaving. I minimized the danger once, told myself it was part of living with unpredictable people. Now, faced with lists and passports and circled dates, I feel less like someone looking for answers and more like an artifact being catalogued. The closet smells faintly of cologne and paper. I close the leather case and lay the items back exactly as I found them because the part of me that catalogs still insists on order. As my hand closes the zipper I find, folded beneath the passports, a single Polaroid. It's small, edges softened from handling. I don't need to turn it over to know the image, I've seen this face before in the dark of my own room. On the back, in that looping hand, one word, written small and certain, tonight. I tell myself I will be surgical about it, label, photograph, bag, file. I spread Sam's things across the kitchen island like evidence. The lamp throws a white pool on paper and Polaroids, the refrigerator hums. Even now, there is a small animal calm in the motion of cataloging. I work in rows, one pile for receipts, one for notes, one for photographs. It steadies me. It is what I do when something breaks, make a list, trace the crack. The hidden drawer was the first puncture. I thought it an oddity, a single aberrant act of curiosity. But the drawer is only a hinge, beyond it the house opens into rooms I never suspected existed. Where I expected miscellany, odd keys, matchbooks, an old Metro card, there is architecture. Paperwork builds on paperwork until I can see the scaffolding of it, itineraries, hotel folios with dates, train stubs, Polaroids catalogued in neat stacks, each with a tiny notation in Sam's looping script. The handwriting looks like a private map, watch, note, return. The dates climb like a ladder. There are clusters, New York, Portland, a 2-week stretch in Chicago, each bracketed by receipts and the same few phrases, door pose, no alarm, proud smile. I find envelopes labeled by year, the older the envelope the thicker the collection, as if he had been layering these for years. In one, a brass hotel key is wrapped in tissue and taped to a Polaroid. On the back of the Polaroid, a woman standing in a narrow hallway, hands folded at her waist, half smile like someone taught to trust a camera. The writing says, Doorway, July 2016, owned. My throat closes. I turn the stack over and over, I catalog each face. They are not sleeping, not captured asleep the way my photograph is, the delicate, helpless framing that had once made me forgive him in the name of intimacy. These women stand. They smile. They look accomplished in the way of someone photographed by a person who wants the world to know they possess her. There is a sameness to the tilt of jaw, the angles he favored, the way he centered a doorway as if it were a stage. I find names repeated across notebooks, Mara, L, Tessa, names underlined or circled. Mara shows up in 3 different books, in different inks, the word escalating from a note to an entry to a margin scrawl. In an index card box, organized alphabetically, as if the whole project were a business, Mara is taped on the outside with an inventory inside, date, address, notes. There are receipts for meals, bus fares, and a matchbook from a bar 3 blocks from the building where Mara lived. The matchbook is dated the week before the last entry in Mara's file. There is an anatomy to his surveillance. I begin to see the method where there had only been a man who practiced niceties. Sam's little kindnesses, remembering my laundry schedule, bringing back the exact chocolate I like, offering to run by my mother's apartment because you hate the stairs, were not merely sweet. They were permissions, unremarked ways into my calendar. His notebooks cross-reference my visits, the times my mother answered the phone, the buses I used as a child, the apartment numbers of women he photographed. I am absurd enough to think of them as gifts until I read the marginalia in his leather ledger. Leah, 2/14, Mom apt 3rd, window unlocked, and beneath it, in the same tendency to bracket and underline, photos, pre-sleep or door when awake. My hands shake when I set the ledger down. There are lists that look like itineraries and lists that look like scores, addresses with a column checked off, collected, archived, catalogued. In a map book he has drawn threads between neighborhoods, a lattice of travel that crisscrosses the country and always returns to buildings with thin walls and tenants who kept their curtains open. He had made a route out of vulnerability. I called Detective Ruiz in the small hours, my breath loud in the receiver. Ruiz is methodical in his own way. He asks for timestamps, for copies of certain Polaroids, for the exact phrasing of notes. He sends an email with a PDF attached, the building's missing person report. When I hold the printout to the light, the Polaroid Sam had tucked into an envelope matches the photo in the official file, Mara, chin lifted, doorway framing her like a portrait. In Sam's margin is a date. On the police report the last known sighting is the same day. I think of the bus ticket folded into one of Sam's journals, the one from the summer when my father left, an address from the neighborhood I used to cross. He had written watching beside it. The word is small and clinical. I remember a different time when I would have let a word like that slide because he made me tea and fixed a leak and knew the names my mother used to call me when she thought I was asleep. I remember how forgiven he was for everything. I smell the soap he always used and the exact pattern of his patience. The more paper I spread, the more that kindness becomes a tool. It would have been easier if this had been an obsession contained to me, if Sam had loved me in a monstrous way but only me. That would be singular, horrifying but finite. Instead there is multiplicity. There are other faces, other doors, dates stacked like ledger entries. There is a catalog. I find a small shoebox at the bottom of his closet. Inside, tied with a rubber band, are the Polaroids sorted by year. On the top is Mara. Underneath Mara there are 6 that are labeled only with initial and city. Somewhere between the 3rd and 4th, there is a phrase I have seen before, owned, door, smile proud. The drawer was not the anomaly. It was the first seam I tugged. As the fabric unfurls, I can see how everything was stitched together, the routes, the lists, the smiles. I keep thinking if I find the right place to stop pulling, the rest will hold. But when I lift the next photograph, my hands move on their own, and the date beside Mara's name hits me like a fist. The date beside her name is the day she vanished. There is a loose square of grout behind the soap dish in our bathroom that I've felt 100 times and never thought about. It gives the same way a scab gives when you don't pick it, papery, a little sticky at the edges. I know the exact sound it makes when I press it, and that night the sound was an animal noise in the quiet of a Sunday. I pried the tile with a butter knife because I was bored and because the apartment was too quiet, because when silence sits in a house it collects like dust and I have this need to sweep it off surfaces. Behind the tile was a hollow pocket the size of my palm. My first thought was lint or a coin. My second was that it smelled faintly of camera film, chemical, a little sweet. I fished backward with my fingers and came up with a compact camera, black and warm as if it had been wearing someone's hand. It was one of those simple point-and-shoots, rounded edges, the ring of the lens like an eye. There was a smear of dried lotion on one corner, a tiny loop of human hair tucked into the strap. It is ridiculous that I felt, for a second, a ridiculous domestic panic. Did I leave it somewhere? Did I misplace it? Then I remembered the loose drawer, the Polaroids, the matchbooks. The adrenaline slid through me cold and flat, no dramatic rush, just the small, clinical click of a something snapped into place. The line between being watched and being trapped had already been crossed in this apartment. I could feel it as I shut the bathroom door, as though I had shut the casing of a machine and left its gears exposed. I carried the camera into the bedroom with the same methodical care I use when I handle fragile things. I gathered the Polaroids from the nightstand, the woman asleep with the light from the bedside lamp casting a warm oval over her cheek, the bus ticket folded in yellow, a receipt from a diner where I had been with my mother 5 months earlier. I flipped the Polaroid slowly, because speed felt like panic and I wanted proof in the steadiness of my hands. On the back of the sleeping photograph, Sam's looping hand had written a date, 2 months before we moved in, and a word, watching. The film smelled of fixer and dust. The woman in the picture was me. There was no misremembering it, my mole above my left eyebrow blurred by motion, the freckle on my clavicle, the way the sheet bunched at my knee. I pressed the picture between my fingers as if it were a thin glass shard, and the glass in the window behind me flashed like a knife. Sam was on the couch when I came downstairs. He had the lamp on and the flat screen muted. He was reading one of his little notebooks. He keeps them everywhere, the way he keeps receipts in envelopes or photographs in labeled stacks. He did not startle when I set the camera and the Polaroids on the coffee table. He looked up slowly, and the face that met mine had the same infuriating calm I've come to know, affable in public, precise and practiced in private, the sort of expression that wants to offer help and also to ascertain what help will be necessary before you ask. "Where did you find them?" he asked. His voice was careful the way he is careful with small kindnesses, steady, meant to soothe a dog or a neighbor. "Behind a tile," I said. "Why are there photographs of me from before we lived here?" "Why is there?" I caught myself. The sentences were small, precise things, evidence, not theatrical accusation. My father's absence taught me to catalog rather than to plead. It is how you keep your balance after a fracture. I laid out the Polaroids, the bus ticket, the camera-like specimens on glass. He watched my hands the way someone watches the hands of a surgeon. Sam's face didn't fill with shame. It filled with something flatter, like resignation or a page turned toward the footnote. He folded the notebook open with a finger and did not look away. "I told you I'd been doing work," he said. The words were measured. Research. People. Patterns. Patterns? I repeated. The word was childish. I thought of tessellated tiles and of the cracked seam in my childhood house where my father used to walk out and not turn back. Patterning isn't consent, Sam. He exhaled, a sound that could have been a laugh if there were humor in it. "There's a name," he said. "Mara Delgado. 412 Halcyon. Unit 3B. It landed on the air like coordinates. The Polaroids lay between us like a map already creased. I had seen the name before, a tempo in the margins of the landlord's list, an old missing persons file I had opened on impulse weeks earlier. My throat closed around a small, geographic panic, that these were not random images but an atlas. "Stay calm," he said. The hospitality in the syllables turned dry and official, the sort of instruction you get when there has been an accident and someone with a clipboard tells you not to move. There was no apology in his face. There was a kind of professional pity, the way someone might show pity for a subject in an experiment who is finally discovering the hypothesis was never theirs to answer. "Why would you tell me that?" My voice came out thinner than I intended. "Why would you put a camera there?" He leaned forward and folded his hands. Up close, there were things I had always liked, soft jaw, the way his eyes narrowed when he read, but they were arranged now like features on a mask. "I didn't put it there to hurt you," he said. "I did it because I was trying to keep you safe." The sentence did not fit its edges, it was a traveler in the wrong language. My mind moved like a forensic light across it. Trying. Keep safe. The verb and the object sat like separate pieces on a table that did not belong together. From what? I asked, because the right questions are small and cold and demand a list of facts. He hesitated a fraction, an almost invisible fissure of something like grief. Then he gave the name and address again, slower this time, the way one might give a prescription, as if the words themselves could inoculate me. "Mara Delgado. 412 Halcyon. Unit 3B. Stay calm." It was a map to a place I did not want to go, not simply a spot on a street but the implied route of a life I had thought private. It implied a history written in margins and Polaroids and keys kept like talismans. My pulse ricocheted in my wrists. I imagined the loose tile in the bathroom as a little mouth that had been feeding him names and faces. The camera's lens stared back at me like an accusation. The Polaroid in my hand trembled with the shape of all the things I did not yet know. "Don't," I said, the single syllable breaking like thin glass. Stay calm, he repeated, as if repeating the command might make it true. He reached for the notebook and slid it toward me, open to a page of lists with my name written in his looping hand. I felt the world tilt a fraction, small and disorienting, like stepping off a curb you thought you knew. I heard myself count things the way people count breaths during panic. 1, 2, breathe. I thought of my mother on the other side of town, of the file I had printed out from the precinct website and tucked into a drawer like a splinter, of the way my father's absence had taught me that what you are told to trust is not always safe. Stay calm, he said again, and the apartment answered with the soft, endless hum of the refrigerator. The camera on the table seemed heavier than it had been in my hand. I realized that for months someone had been making a map with me at the center and that the next step would be to follow it. I reached for the Polaroid with fingers that were steady because they had to be. I turned it so that the sleeping woman was facing up and I looked at my own face, innocently unaware, and then I looked at Sam. He watched me watch the photograph as if he had always been watching me do exactly that. He said the address once more, like a pin dropped on a world map. I swallowed and tasted that map on my tongue. The name, the address, the instruction, 3 coordinates that felt like a summons. My hands closed around the Polaroid until the edges left crescents of white on my skin. Stay calm, he had said. I was not sure which of us he meant. After the police finished with the apartment, after Ruiz had taken my statement and photographed the bedspread and catalogued the drawer like it was a crime scene in a textbook, the place felt too full and impossibly thin at once. It was as if every surface was the wrong temperature, the couch too warm, the kitchen counter too slick. Boxes of Sam's notebooks sat in the hall for evidence, the lamp he'd favored still hummed with a filament memory. I was supposed to be packing, or at least sleeping, but instead the mail came. They arrived in batches over a week, plain white envelopes, manila sleeves, postcards with postage from towns I'd never been to. Detective Ruiz had said to expect letters, people who had recognized handwriting, photos, little tokens, so I wasn't surprised in a technical way. Surprise wasn't the hard thing. The hard thing was the texture of them in my hands, thin paper lint and adhesive, the tack of someone's nervous saliva on a stamp, the way a return address can unmake you, even if it's the name of a city you have no map for. I cleared the tiny kitchen table and stacked them like evidence. There were 22 by the time I stopped counting. Some were typed, cold, efficient admissions, some were looped and trembling in ink, apologies that blurred where the writer had cried against the page. A few had coffee rings. One had a lipstick smudge at the corner of the flap, bright and defiant. Most had been written on the backs of grocery lists and train timetables, on the margins of manuscripts and the backs of Polaroid sleeves. Postmarks from 3 years ago, from last spring, from a month I remembered being at my mother's after the fracture, when Sam had insisted on driving me there because the roads were ice. The dates threaded through their pages matched the dates I'd found on the Polaroids in the hidden drawer, the receipts and matchbooks and bus tickets I'd catalogued at 2 a.m., the ones that used to be meaningless until they weren't. They told the same story in 10,000 small variations. He smiled at the right time, he offered a camera like it was a kindness. He learned how to make people trust the camera, or the note, or the angle. He called it a project, one woman wrote, the letters irregular and tiny. A book about strangers in a city. I thought it was art. I was wrong. Another, short, blunt, said, I helped him once. I thought it would end there. It didn't. There were accounts of flirtations that slicked into surveillance, of meals paid and then photographed, of nights left feeling exposed but explaining it to themselves with the small, exacting lies people tell. He was lonely, he liked collecting. There were apologies, so many apologies, each one a raw, stamped confession. I'm sorry I didn't see, I'm sorry I thought I was safe, I'm sorry I didn't say anything sooner. Reading them, I catalogued like Ruiz had taught me to, name, date, location, method, then I let myself feel the parts of the sentence the police report couldn't. The woman who wrote from a bus station in Tucson described the exact tilt of a head in a photograph and how, when she realized there were 2 holes drilled in the baseboard, she had laughed because of course she had been silly. Another folded her admission into a drawing of the building stairwell, arrows showing where the cameras had been hidden. One included a Polaroid, colors sleeping under age, and on the back, the phone number of a shelter. Small mercies slipped between the pages. I felt hollowed by it, like someone had taken a spoon and scraped the inside of me out, but also oddly fierce, as if every written confession stitched a seam somewhere in my chest. Each woman writing felt like a needle pulling thread through cloth, repairing something I hadn't known was torn. I sorted the pages into piles, immediate follow-up, corroboration, names to give Ruiz. I flagged dates next to sentences so small my hands had to steady with the other. Fury and gratitude sat in my throat together and tasted like metal. At one point I put the kettle on and forgot to turn it off. The whistle began an agitated staccato that matched how my head was beating. I read a postcard about a man who kept receipts for equipment he never used. I read an apology from a woman who'd mistaken attention for affection, who apologized for letting him take a photo of her sleeping and for not trusting the instinct that told her to check the camera lens. There were patterns, locations, brands, a small, looping handwriting that recurred like a watermark. The handwriting made my skin prickle. I had seen it everywhere. The last envelope was heavier than the others. It had been tucked between two printed statements like a hidden file. My name was across the front in a looping hand I could have traced with my eyes in the dark, the soft, self-assured loop Sam used when he wanted something to feel inevitable. I didn't realize my fingers were shaking until the paper rasped under them. I thought about Ruiz standing in the doorway the day he'd told me to save everything. I thought about how my father had left by the time I was 8 and how I had become good at watching the seams where things fell away. I told myself to breathe. I told myself this was just another letter. I opened it on the table. The inside smelled faintly of tobacco and cheap cologne, the scent I'd learned to associate with Sam's pockets. There was no salutation, no explanation, just a single sentence, centered and certain. Mara is alive. The case moves slowly but forward in that quiet way everything catastrophic does once it becomes paperwork, subpoenas, an arrestee list with my name on it as a witness, press knocking politely and then more insistently until they learn to be modest around a person who looks like she might break if poked too hard. Sam's answers arrive in paragraphs of legalese, neat, compartmentalized, the same contained voice he used when he opened my door with soup and a smile, and I cataloged the damage in a notebook of my own. I keep a list the way I used to count stairs after a fall, each item an attempt to measure where the ground used to be and whether it still was. Detective Ruiz brings me files on plain manila trays and, when he leaves, I take them apart at the kitchen table like an autopsy. Receipts in neat stacks. Polaroids that fog at the edges from handling. Dates I cross-check with the bills and the bus tickets and the pointless receipts from cafes I never went back to after the first time I noticed the watchfulness. I write notes in the margins, times, locations, who knew what and when, and the notebook grows heavy with facts the way a stomach does with grief. We move out in fits. I find a temporary room through a friend, a high-ceiling place on the 3rd floor with a thrift store bed that squeaks and a dresser with an underside scabbed in old paint. I sleep with the curtains open at first, counting the moon's progress across the ceiling until it stops mattering that someone knew which window I preferred. Friends come over and I tell them the story in stages, what I find most useful to show first, what I need to leave for later, and they cry like the weather, unexpected and then steady. Their tears are halting and real, they press hands into my shoulder blades as if they can holding me together by pressure alone. It helps sometimes, and it doesn't at all for the rest. Unpacking happens like a ritual. Boxes labeled books and kitchen and a careless miscellaneous that I later curse myself for with a soft, private swear. I make a small home because a home is practice in claiming space, and I want to practice being someone who keeps living. The last box I bring in is unremarkable, heavy with linens and the small things that make a place familiar, a mug I like, a stack of journals. The dresser was already in the room, unremarkable, and when I put my hand on its underside it feels as I expect, splintered wood, dust, a varnish tacky with age. I tap the underside out of habit. Habits have become my language when newness threatens to be loud. My fingertips find a hairline seam, exactly the width of a nicked fingernail, the same small seam that first unspooled everything. I know seams now, they are where everything secret is packed away. I don't think so much as do it, a thumb finds the groove, a fingernail wedges, and the pain pops up with the faint give of an old wound. Inside is an envelope the color of sun-bleached paper, its flap tucked under itself like a held breath. There's a faint smear of blue ink at one corner and a circle of adhesive that looks like someone tried to seal it too carefully and then forgot. The air that spills out has that particular smell of other people's rooms, cologne, cigarette smoke caught in fabric, something like lemon oil used to hide the smoke. My hand remembers other finds, smaller collections of things that tracked me, a hotel matchbook with a stamp from a city I thought I hadn't visited, a leather notebook with my name looped in his handwriting, a Polaroid of me asleep that feels obscene in its intimacy. Patterns. The seam under this dresser is another node. The envelope is addressed to me. His hand, the same slant he'd used when he labeled storage boxes and when he wrote simple notes to leave on my pillow, arches across the front, Leah. Beneath it there is a postmark whose ink has been rubbed thin but the date still bones out at me, months before we moved in together, a date I had already circled in the margins of my own notebook when a receipt from his drawer matched a bus route from my childhood street. Dates have become a map. The map has been redrawn to include him. I hold the envelope with the care of someone handling evidence. My thumb finds the flap's weakness and I ease it open like cutting into an old scar. There is a single sheet folded within, not a photograph this time, but paper that flexes with the familiarity of a voice. My throat tightens because I know the ways words can be used, comfort, control, confession, and because the person who wrote them could rearrange truth into anything he needed it to be. Before I can decide whether I'm the kind of person who lets storms pass by looking at the clouds, I slide the paper out and let the light fall across the first line. The letters are tidy, almost patient. I should taste bile, instead the room sharpens into the scratch of my pen from all those nights cataloging. The first line is 3 words. They straighten the air between my ribs and fold me into a place I haven't been since the seam in the nightstand opened and everything tilted. Whatever they say will tell me which axis I'm going to live my life around now, rage, forgiveness, meticulous tallying, because they're one last deliberate act in a series of deliberate acts. I read them aloud to the empty room, because sound is how I negotiate reality, and the words make the floor fall out from under whatever small, practical person I thought I had become.